Hey, how's everybody doing today? So, we're a little earlier than normal, but we had some time necessities that we had to go over. Today, we actually have Seth. He's going to be running the show. He has a debate that he's going to be doing with a friend of his from Holland. So, we have Seth and Marije that are going to be on today. I'm going to bring them on right now and have them introduce themselves and tell you where they're from and let Seth take it from here. So without further ado, here we go. Microphones, guys.
What's up, everybody? What's up, Joe?
How's
Hi,
it going,
Mariah.
man?
I'm Seth with Huff's Herps, everybody. And this is Mariah that's joining us. Mariah, where
Mariah, you
exactly are you from
turn your
in Holland?
microphone back on. Let me see here.
Missing your mic, Mariah.
Sorry.
There we go.
There we
I'm
go.
from the Netherlands, all the way up from the northern part of the Netherlands. And
Okay.
I'm a small fat-tailed gecko breeder here.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, first of all, thank both of you, Joe, and especially Mariah, for agreeing to do this such short notice and last minute.
Yeah,
I did a video the other day that as I expected it to, caught a little bit of attention from some of the naturalistic breeders or some of the naturalistic keepers and breeders. And, of course, in the advancing groups that they don't want to hear any of it. And so I thought it was a good opportunity to, well, actually, you kind of sparked it, Mariah. You commented on Greg's little excerpt that he posted on his little reel, and we're like, man, I wish more people would talk about this and it not be so black and white.
exactly.
And I just threw it out to you like, hey, you want to do a debate? And you're like, let's do it.
Yeah,
So thank you for being so willing to just jump into that.
yeah, of course. Thank
um
you for having me.
yeah, so I guess we'll just jump right into it, right? So first of all, I think we've heard plenty about me on previous episodes or other podcasts or whatever, so let's hear a little bit about you, Mariah, and then I want to go into like care requirements and stuff like that. So for everybody that's watching, this is like solely based on fat tail keeping.
Yeah,
You can apply it to different animals however you want, but we are discussing in this podcast, in this debate, just fat tail keeping on racks like I do versus bioactive naturalistic like Mariah does. um, so just ha- keep that in mind for this entire conversation. So let's hear a little bit about you, Mariah. Where exactly are you from? How'd you get into fat tails? How long you been into fat tails? All the goods. Go
yeah.
ahead.
So I started into getting fat-tailed geckos around 4 or 5 years ago, after doing an internship at a local reptile store. And I discovered the fat-tailed gecko, and I fell in love with them because they were different than leopard geckos, and I really liked their natural environment. That's a bit more forestry as opposed to leopard geckos. And
Okay,
so I
so
started with just
let me
one.
interrupt you for just a second because that's a really important point that I love. So you, first of all, what about them is different? Whenever you say they're different than leopard geckos, what do you mean? Because I have people ask me that at the expos all the time, and I know my answer, but I want to hear your answer. What
Yeah,
is different to you about them than leopard geckos?
yeah, a lot of people ask me the very same question. At first, they say, "Yeah, they look alike, right?" And I'm like, "No, well, they're not the same at all in my eyes." The
Right.
most important differences to me are, first of all, the enclosure. It's a much more forestry and much more humid than leopard geckos, and so it's easier to use live plants. And I think it's more aesthetically pleasing, personally. They're also a little bit different in temperament. I compare leopard geckos to the extroverted reptiles, and fatal geckos are more introverted, that are a bit shy at first, but once you win them over with food, they're your friend. So
Yep, I, t-
that's
I
the,
have the same comparison, not exact same, but similar. Yeah, I have more of a cats and dogs kind of comparison, but
yeah,
that's
yeah,
yeah, I
yeah,
agree.
exactly. And then they're a bit more compact. They have stubbier toes, stubbier legs, as opposed to the longer legs that leopard geckos have. And personally, I find really pretty.
Cool. That's interesting. I've never heard that perspective of like part of what it drew me to them was how they're kept, and that's an interesting uh, perspective. I like that. So anyway, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I wanted to touch on that while we were there because I
Yeah,
always have the same question of how they're different, and I agree. The personalities are totally different. I think fat tails are a little more like cats, where they'll like not as outgoing and not begging to come out like a Leo will, but once you get them out, they're like, oh, okay, you want to cuddle? Let's cuddle.
yeah,
Whereas a leopard gecko is more outgoing and might be more begging to come out, but then once you get them out, they're like dogs and they're like all over the place
yeah,
and like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah.
where next? Where are we gonna go hide next? And so like that's the comparison I make to people.
Yeah, that's also very true. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But I like that too, extrovert and introvert. That's a good one too. I'll have to use that.
yeah.
So go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'll try not to do that, but
It was a
I'll
good
probably do it again.
question. Yeah, so I started with just a pet, but then as I learned more about African fatal geckos, I noticed how they're just not as much available as leopard geckos. And on Reptile Expos, I just saw wild caught animals, and I was like, why are we doing that? Because they're not difficult to breed at all. So that's when I decided I wanted to get into breeding. Um, and I also have a background in animal management. So over the years, I have learned a lot of about topics like nature, ecology, wild animals, and topics related to that. So when I got into reptile keeping, I really wanted to apply that knowledge into the way that I keep fatal geckos. Not to make just a bioactive enclosure, but to really understand how these guys live in the wild and how I could recreate that in my care. For example, you see like the bio dude. He is very famous into the bioactive corner of reptile keeping, and he made a bioactive enclosure for fetal geckos as well. Like when you Google bioactive setup fetal gecko, that's the first thing you see. And I had a little bit of struggle with that because when you looked at the enclosure, it was very a jungle vibe, like tropical forest, and that was not quite the natural environment of fatal geckos. And I just didn't understand how you could make a pretty enclosure, but then not having a resemblance of the wild environment. So that's when I started to really dig into the wild habitat of the fatal geckos, and I really wanted to recreate that. And I wanted to show that to other people as well. So that's why I started this whole thing. And also to show people how fun fatal geckos are. I think the best way to educate people is by showing them and to present on my account and just talk about them and yeah, just lead by example, I guess, in that sense. So that's why I got into the breeding stuff, and I've been doing that for a couple of years now. So
I agree. I agree 100% as far as just educating people by exposing them to these awesome animals and in so many ways, exposing them to their beauty, exposing them to their cool personalities. I found that when you just put a fat tail in somebody's hands at an expo and they just melt into their palm and curl up and go to sleep, they're just like, oh my gosh, I need this,
yeah,
and not to encourage impulse buys, but I mean, people are there to impulse buy anyway. So I would rather educate them properly and have them impulse buy an animal that's actually a good starter reptile rather than impulse buying a sulcata tortoise or a green iguana or a bearded dragon or something that is not the greatest starter. But
yeah,
anyway,
I agree.
um, so how long ago did you first get into fat tails, Mariah? When was that?
4 years ago. Yeah,
4 years ago is when you first started learning about them, or that's when you like first started like buying them, or both?
both.
Both. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and what kind of research did you dive into when you say at that point you weren't happy with, what a certain site had and you wanted better? How did you dive into that from there? What was your next step?
Well, because I studied animal management, I kind of knew how to search for reliable sources. And there weren't a lot of that at all, but there were some that were well written. And there was one scientific article, and I kind of went from there. And so at first, I really had basic care, not into the wildlife plants at all. But later on, I saw that video of Dave Kaufman, and that really helped. That was an amazing video. And I also Googled plant species that naturally occurred in the same habitat as the fatal gecko, and then went and bought those plant species. So
Oh, you're even using identical plants that
yeah,
are. Oh, that's cool.
yeah,
That's cool. So that's an interesting point that you made about like you weren't satisfied with the tropical, just run of the mill, and you wanted it more dialed in, because that's something I tell people a lot at the expos. Because here's one thing I do, and I'm going to talk about the expos a lot because I do a lot of expos. But one thing that I don't like at, when I'm at the expos, about my setup, as much as I'm happy with my overall setup, is I do a lot of bioactive enclosures, like tropical arboreal bioactives, because we do sell some gargoyles, and I have best friends that sell leechies and cresties and gargs, and so like I sell a lot of those, and that's what pays for my tables, basically, is the
yeah,
profit I make from those cages I make. Um, and then I have my gecko, I'll have a couple gargoyle geckos, and then I have all my Leos and fat tails, and then I'll have a small stack of, my cages that I sell with those guys. And there's a obvious, and I know I'm doing it to myself, but there's a common misconception when people walk up to my table and they're like, oh, well, we wanted this enclosure with this gecko, and they're wanting the tropical arboreal. And I'm like, no, you can't, and I have to explain to them. And again, I know I've noted it to myself. I need to either make more signage or have my booth more separated or something like that, but, or just stop doing the bios altogether. But I enjoy doing them, and people like them. So it's hard not to. But my point is, I have to tell people all the time, I have to explain to people all the time that you can't force an animal to make itself work in an enclosure just because this is what you like the look of, and this
yeah,
is and this is how you want it to look, or this is how you want to take care of an enclosure that is naturalistic. You have to make sure that you're doing the opposite. You're molding that enclosure around that animal's needs, that specific animal's
exactly.
needs. And that's,
Yeah,
I think that's a mark that a lot of people miss whenever they're, thinking about doing bioactives or doing bioactives, and going that route. That's one of the big things that people aren't thinking about the big picture of, is like, what does this animal need, as opposed to, what can I make this animal fit into? Because this is
yeah,
what I want.
I completely
Um,
agree. Yeah,
and that you had a good example of that in the beginning, of saying like, I knew that I kind of wanted, not the desert, but like, you didn't want the semi, arid, submontanous, type of enclosure. You kind of wanted something a little more in between. So you kind of bridged that gap on your own, of being
yeah,
like, okay, well, I know what I want, so I'm gonna, and I kind of like this animal, and then you just kind of gravitated to it, right?
yeah.
That's cool. So Wildcard asked a good question. What kind of plants are you using,
Yeah,
Mariah?
I have a list in my Instagram stories. So if
Oh,
you forget it after this podcast or whatever, or you need to revisit it, you can go to my Instagram's highlight, and then you see a tab that says enclosures, and there it says everything about my enclosures, and also a plant species list. But to name a few, I have snake plants, I have dragon plants, I have the desert rose, and the I don't know the name, the English name.
that's some of the easiest plant names
Spider
I've ever
plant.
heard.
Yeah, they are very hardy plants.
And
The
what was the last one? What was the last one?
spider plants.
Spider.
Yeah,
Okay. I'm familiar with the spider plant. I actually have one of those. I didn't know those were native to Africa.
yeah. If, according to my source, they occur in the same region as Africa. So that's great. I was really
Gotcha.
happy with that.
So, in your research, what did you find? I guess that's my next question. Like, whenever you dove into that and you found a couple of different resources, first of all, do you happen to remember the name of that the best resource that you did find?
The best source was the video of Dave Kaufman that you know, and the scientific article that I sent you.
Okay.
And
Yeah, and
basically,
I've had some people argue about the Dave Kaufman video only being such a small snapshot of temperatures, and that's not a good scientific study because of the lack of data.
yeah,
Um,
But
But I
that was
mean,
funny to me because to talk about the discussion in the advancing husbandry group a little bit for the people who didn't know, the people said that 65 degrees Fahrenheit was fine as a nighttime temperature for fetal geckos. And
yes.
fetal geckos,
To quote specifically, sorry to interrupt you again, but to quote specifically, they say that no secondary heat source is needed as long as your house doesn't get below 64 degrees.
yeah,
And I wasn't aware of that. I've been sending people to that group like for years because I knew that they had a pretty good rundown of everything overall, especially as far as like specifics on lighting and plants, and there it's a really well put together rundown. And so I've been sending people there for years because, again, like, or I don't guess I explained it yet, but like I don't keep them on bio, I keep them on racks. And so as a result, whenever I'm dealing with people that are wanting to know how to keep them on bio, I have a hard time explaining that to people because I don't practice it. I kind of know the gist of it, but I don't want to tell them the wrong way. So I usually tell them, here's how you keep them, on a simple Simon setup, which is more of a quarantine setup anyway that you need to start with.
yeah,
And then here's some resources for you to learn on your own of how to keep them naturalistically, because I don't want to steer you wrong. And that's what I always tell people. And everybody, that's the whole purpose of this podcast, is to get info from Mariah, who's actually practicing it, to be able for me to be able to have a resource to send to people. But anyway, back to the care sheet, everything looks good on it. And I never realized that they had that statement in there about not needing supplemental heat if you're above 64 degrees. And so I kind of raised question to it. And one of the members in there raised question. I raised question to it in my group. And then one of the members raised question to it in the group itself and was met with just some quick snap screenshots of, a climate chart that has a couple of lows that are in that range, a couple of nights,
yeah,
a couple of months out of the year, and when and I want to focus on when you see a low temp, what that means. That does not mean that's what the temp was all night long. When you see 65 degrees, for a certain month of the year in whatever range of Africa we're talking about, and it was 100 degrees all day long, um, you got to think about, first of all, that 65-degree mark that you're seeing is what it saw at twilight. At sunrise is whenever that night temp got down to that low. Those animals weren't experiencing that all night long. At sunset, it was 110 degrees outside. So it gradually dropped to where at 8 or 9, it was probably mid 80s, just like Dave Kaufman's video illustrates. He
yeah.
took air temp at 9 o'clock, I think he said, and it was like 84 degrees or 85.
Yeah, and the
Um,
weird thing was, sorry to interrupt you. The weird thing
no,
was
go.
they stated a scientific article, and that was a scientific study that was done over a period of 2 years.
Right,
And sure, there have been some colder days,
right,
but on average, the night temperature didn't drop below 82 degrees Fahrenheit. So they
right.
didn't even read the scientific study properly because
Exactly.
I read that and I was like, we
Yeah,
should provide the best care for them. Yeah, adult fetal geckos are quite hardy and they can survive a lot, but that doesn't mean that it's natural for them and what's best. And the whole point of bioactive and natural is to do it uh, to the best care possible to the fetal gecko, I would
yep.
assume. So
And
that was
and
very weird to me.
yeah, and a couple of the things that I don't think they're taking into account there is, like I said, first of all, that high temp that you're seeing, or that low temp you're seeing, is the very wee hours of the morning, right at sunrise. It's not all night. It's a very
Yeah,
gradual drop.
yeah,
Um, and second of all, there's several factors, but second of all, you're not factoring in the ground temp that these animals have to escape to once it does cool off past their comfort zone, because that ground is definitely absolutely going to hold a lot of heat.
yeah,
um, the other temperature reading that Dave Kaufman took in that video was during the day inside the mound of one that they caught, and it was 94-degree internal ground temp. So it's going to take a long time for that ground temp to drop from 94 degrees, 95 degrees, all the way down to anywhere near 65 degrees. It's not going to happen on a very regular basis. And there's so many important factors. Another thing is they're taking those extreme temps that those animals may experience on a few days of the year, a few months of the year, and they're saying, okay, because this animal can experience this and they can tolerate it, we're going to force it to experience this every single night, all night long.
Doesn't make
And that's just it doesn't make any sense to me. It's not logical, and it's the most unnatural thing I can think of. Now, if you want to take a few months out of the year and say, okay, I'm going to brumate my animals and make them as natural as possible and really recreate this, then that's one thing, to like focus it and dial things down and fast them properly and have that effect. But if you're trying to do it all year long, that's completely unnatural, and that alone is just insane to me. Um, and and this isn't to bash any groups or bash anybody that's doing it a certain way. These animals, there's all different kind of ways of keeping. And if you're keeping with no heat, no supplemental heat overnight, and you got adult animals that you've had for years and they're doing fine, cool, more power to you. I'm sure you have a fairly warm room temp, and I'm sure you have a very uh, elaborate setup that holds a lot of heat. I would argue that it's still not the same as their ground heat that gets held in the wild if you're really trying to go, you know, 100% simulation of the wild. But we'll get to that in a minute. But the other another really important factor that I don't think is taken into account in these care sheets and articles is whenever you have that that cold of a temp without 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 it being the right time of year. Okay, when you've got babies coming in to that enclosure in the wild, those babies are there's a reason that there's breeding season, and there's a reason that there's a certain time that the females lay eggs and a certain time those eggs hatch, because those babies need a certain environment to be able to thrive. And we know that from raising babies, that if you don't have it just right dialed in, that they're not going to thrive. They're
yeah,
not nearly as hardy. They're, you know, conversely, they're way more fragile than a juvenile or a subadult or an adult, obviously.
absolutely.
And so I think that's a big thing they're missing, is they're putting this information out there and saying this is how you do it, and people are getting an 8 gram gecko, which, by the way, I'll never sell a gecko that young for this reason. I will always grow mine out to usually about 15 grams before they go anywhere. Um, and this is why, because you need some buffer zone there, because a lot of people are are new to this, especially with these species, because it's a more of a beginner species and we cater to the newer people. And so you have to account for that and realize that these people may not know exactly what they're doing and how they need to do it. And so they're getting a little bitty 8 gram baby from some drop shipper at an expo, and they're going home and they're putting it in this nice setup they've been researching for a year or 2 years, and they think they've got it perfect, man. It's just temps are perfect. Their heating, their basking spot is perfect. You know, everything's dialed in, but there's no heat at night. Okay, and if it was an adult gecko, it would probably be okay
Yeah,
if the room was warm enough. But with these babies, I'm telling you, 9 times out of 10, they will not thrive in that environment. They are going to just shut down and not want to eat, and they're going to hide on the warm side all the time, and you're never going to see them. And I mean, and this is speaking from experience. I get these messages all the time, mostly not from my customers, because I take a lot of time to educate my customers really well when they get a gecko from me. Um, but a lot of times it's from other people that got a gecko from either somebody else or from a pet store or from, you know, just some random show, and they're in one of the groups, and just you can see them struggling a lot, you know. And so anyway, that's my biggest pet peeve about that no heat at night thing. Is I agree, reptiles definitely need to cool down. I mean, uh you can go anywhere in the world and you're going to see a drastic cool down, you know, some more than others at night. I agree, they need a cool down, but I don't agree with it being from the proper temp of 90 degrees all the way down to our house temps that are 65, 70 degrees.
yeah,
And and just to kind of snowball another point in there, another thing that I think they're not taking into account in these care sheets is they're talking about a target temp, right? And they've got the right temperature. They're saying they need 90 degrees or 92 degrees or 94 degrees. I agree, that's the right temp for a fat tail. But what they're doing is they're targeting that in their basking spot. Okay, and in the cases that they're doing stack of hides. I don't remember. I think they call it a hide stack or something like that in the groups. Um, you're gonna be hitting it pretty close because they're gonna have hides at different levels, but there's still not. Again, back to the Dave Kaufman video. They caught a fat tail in a termite mound, measured inside that termite mound, and it was 94 degrees. Okay, so if you're getting 94 degrees at the top of that hide stack, then you're definitely not getting 94 degrees at the bottom wherever they're where they would prefer to be, because fat tails are not big on climbing. They're kind of clumsy. They can climb. I'm not saying they're completely like can't do it, but they're
Yeah,
not nearly the climbers that Leos are for sure. They don't have the same claw structure.
yeah.
Um,
Usually during the day they will hide, and then at night sometimes they will climb. Is what I have
that
experienced during the day
that's
as
what I
well
was.
as possible.
Yep, I was absolutely about to get into it and ask you what the activity level you see from your animals. Because you, first of all, hang on, let's back up a little bit. I went off on a tangent. Sorry, guys. I do that a lot. So let me back up and get to my notes, okay? And make sure that I don't miss something. So
Yeah.
first of all, I'm gonna run through a quick fat tail care overview with you and kind of just bounce back and forth of what I have on my care sheet and what you have on your care sheet, basically. So temps. What temps do you like for fat tails? What do you like to teach people?
On the hot side, I do. I never do Fahrenheit, but 92
Oh, I'm
Fahrenheit.
sorry. Yeah, go ahead and spit Celsius. Us
I did
Americans can
write it
convert
down.
it.
I did write it
No,
down. Yeah, 92 Fahrenheit on overall on the warm side of the enclosure, and then the cool side is around 85 degrees Fahrenheit during the day.
okay,
And then during the night, I have a heat mat for the hot on the hot side. That's also very important because it doesn't make sense to change hot sides. So I have a heat mat on the hot side, and there it gets around 90 degrees Fahrenheit on in their favorite height. And then the ambient temperature is at lowest 82 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's
okay,
kind of my heating setup.
okay. And so, first of all, do you see them? Hang on. First of all, you say 92 degrees hot side during the day. Is that like inside their hide, or that's under the
On the
basking light,
height.
like in the
That's on
basking
the
spot?
height. Yeah.
Inside their hide. What is your temp? Do you have a measurement for like under the basking light? Because you use a basking light, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Or a heat lamp?
halogen heat lamp. Yeah, that's correct. I think exactly under the hot spot it gets 94, 95 max, I guess.
Okay, and then you have a hide right below that that registers about 92, right?
Yeah, yeah, a little
Okay.
bit to the back of the enclosure, but yeah, around
Okay.
the place.
And then And then I agree. You don't need the heating pad on the other side. You need to keep the hot side on the hot side.
Yes.
While we're on that right there, let's talk about that. Okay, so one thing that my another friend of mine named Mariah, who is the girl that does the Reptifiles, right? If y'all haven't checked her out, check her out. Reptifiles.com, I think, or she's on Instagram, just Reptifiles. But I met her at the Salt Lake City Expo. She was vending next to me, and it was really neat because we were right there next to each other, and we were she was doing what I'm always doing at expos, just teaching people about what the animals that they're getting, or the animal they got, or the animal they have at home, whether they were getting anything from me or not. She That's all she does at the expos. She goes and sets up with an 8-foot table of care sheets for all different species, and she stands out there and doesn't sell a single thing. She just informs people. She just educates
That's
people.
nice.
How cool is that?
Yeah, that's
Like
amazing.
it was so neat having her next to me, because I was like, I would teach them how like I said, I teach them the quarantine way and like the basics, and I give them my care sheet, and then I go, and then just jump right over to to Mariah, and she'll teach you about how to keep them bioactive. And
Yeah.
so it was really cool and convenient to have her right there next to me. But anyway, I was talking to her yesterday on the phone, and she was teaching me about the differences that they've, I don't know how recently, but some of the recent research about the differences between infrared A and infrared C, right? So the infrared A is from what you get from a heat lamp. That's the penetrative heat that you get from sunlight, right?
Yeah.
And that is the most energizing heat for a reptile. And I totally get that. And I totally understand why a beardy and a uromastix and a iguana, or any of those, a monitor, any diurnal, uh, you know, animal like that would need that penetrative heat. But my question here is with and this is going to go right back into the follow up of what you were talking about your activity level and your fat tails. First of all, no, let me finish my thought, and then we'll go. My question is, in the wild, that termite mound that's beat by the sun all day with the infrared A, that heat that termite mound is now holding is now infrared C. Am I understanding that right?
I don't know.
Okay. Okay.
Because
Well,
I'm not the biggest heat lamp expert. Um,
okay.
it just made the most sense to also provide overhead heating besides heat mats, because it's the natural thing to do, because
Okay.
naturally the
So,
sun also come. So
okay.
yeah, I'm gonna be
No,
honest about that. I am
no,
not.
thank you. Thank you. Hey, you know what? That's the most important thing that you can be able to do in this hobby is say, I don't know. Because too many people just talk out of their ass without knowing what they're talking about and aren't humble enough to say, I don't know the answer to that. Let's look it up, you know. So I'm going to just go out on a limb and say from my conversation with Mariah yesterday, I think that I'm correct there. And if anybody in the comments section knows what I'm talking about on a better level than I do or than Mariah does, please feel free to comment and correct me or confirm with me. But I think that once that energy is stored in that termite mound as the sun goes down, now you have a 95-degree termite mound that's going to start gradually cooling off very slowly, right? Especially a foot down deep in it. So to my understanding, now you have infrared C heat, radiant heat, right? That's stored in that termite mound.
Yeah,
So where I'm really confused is on these advancing herpetological groups or these advancing husbandry groups or whatever, how they're saying that an undertank heater is completely unnatural in our home setting when we're trying to mimic this weird conundrum of the West African Sahara, right? Um, what's the best way to do that? To me, just like you're doing it, exactly how you're doing it. So your heaters are off during the day and they come on at night. Is that how you do it? Are they
yeah,
on all day? They're completely off during the day.
yeah,
So I think you're doing it perfectly because to me, that is doing what the sun would do during the day. It gives them that basking area if they want to use it, and it's heating up that warm side to the temp that it would be in the wild, that 90 plus degrees that they would be in their burrow. And then when the sun goes down, when your lights go off, that heating pad warms up to maintain that burrow temp
yeah.
just like it would in the wild.
Exactly. Yeah,
So that's exactly how I would think that you would properly set it up if you're really trying to be as naturalistic as possible. And now let's point out we're talking about African fat tail geckos, okay? That's not to say that this is what a leopard gecko needs. That's not to say this is certainly what a more temperate species would need. Like I keep three-toed box turtles, and those guys can deal with some really cold temps. I mean, they can freeze, you know.
yeah,
And so I don't worry about them at all. My adults stay outside all winter, and my babies, I don't have any supplemental heat at all. I don't even have any heat on them during the wintertime on their cage indoors because I want them to experience a little bit of a brumation effect. But
yeah,
you got to really think about what you're working with, what you have, and where they're from. Same thing with my Euromastics. Um, my hotspot is insanely hot for him, but I don't have any supplemental heat for him at night because in the deserts where he's from, it really does cool off significantly every night. And the way that he acts tells me that he doesn't need any supplemental heat because I don't see him after about noon, 1 o'clock. He goes in his burrow. He's done with his heat lamp, and I don't see him again until the next morning. So that's and now let's go ahead and snowball that into you tell us what is the observation you have of the activity level of your fat tails in that setup. Now that we know what your setup is and how you have it as far as the heat, you know, transfer the heat alternate alternation, heat lamp to undertank heater. Sorry guys, I'm stumbling all over my words. Now tell us what activity level do you see? Do you see them out when the lights are out? Do you see them basking in the basking area?
before I answer that question, I had a question. How is the humidity handled in a bio enclosure, and how does this help the temp? I thought to answer that question real quick
Yeah,
because
sure.
else
Yep.
I would forget it. I mist once a day, typically in this rainy season, not during the dry season. And I have wooden enclosures, so they are really holding humidity very very well. So the substrate stays a little bit moist for a while, and the temperature decreases temporarily for 1 or 2 degrees. And yeah, it stays relatively stable because the substrate is moist. I hope that answers your question.
And do you have well? And we'll dive more into that in a minute. That was my
Yeah.
next question with humidity for you as well. Um, so
Okay.
what's the, no? It's all good. What's your activity level that you see on your fat tails? Do you see them out before lights out? Do you see them come bask?
Yeah, I am really excited to talk about this. So a little thing that is really important to mention before I answer this question is my UVB and my LED lights are not on an on and off system, but the UVB gradually comes out and gradually turns down. And
Okay.
I also have a dimming thermostat on my heat lamp. So in the evening, everything slowly decreases. So you have a sunrise and sunset type of setup. And
So
since
translation, guys, she's put some money into her system. Okay, she didn't hold back on her
yeah,
setup. Is what that translates to.
facts.
That's
Um,
cool. Okay, so go ahead.
but anyway, so I really noticed that my fatal geckos became active at around 8 p.m. and then they were starting to roam around in the enclosure, and then that continued during the night. And one thing that was really interesting is that this also applies to my light sensitive geckos. There are a few fetal gecko morphs that are light sensitive.
Okay,
Uh,
hang on. Let me interrupt you. Stop. Back up. I missed. I was reading a comment. What time do your lights turn off, and when do your geckos come out?
oh, yeah, my lights turn off at 9 p.m. and my
Okay.
geckos become active at around 8 p.m.
Okay. But and are your lights still full blast at 8 p.m. or are they already
No,
starting on the wind on the
No,
downfall?
from 12 to 3 p.m. they're full blast, so then the UVB is strongest, and the LED is strongest, and the heat is strongest. And then after
Okay.
3 p.m., the LED completely shuts off, so then you only have the UVB and the heat lamp. And then those start to slow down already at 3 p.m. And then at 8 p.m., there's a little bit of heat lamp, a little bit of UVB. So then it's like,
Okay. And then basically just very low light for that last hour,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that's when you're seeing that activity is
yeah,
in that last hour of twilight. Okay.
yeah. During the day,
And
sometimes
then
sorry, during the day
no, go
sometimes
ahead. No.
the geckos that I own the longest are already very comfortable with me being in the room, so they will hide in plain view sometimes or partially with their body exposed. And the geckos that I have a little shorter, they typically stay in their termite mounds that I made for them. So they choose to fully subtract from the view, but some of them stay out and about and sleep just with their head sticking out or their feet sticking out. And when I feed them, they are like, "Give me food." So that's a little bit of
And,
activity during the day, but
and that's
most
during the day.
yeah, yeah. Well,
So you
sometimes
do get
I
some
feed during
you
the day. I try to do it in the evening mostly, but sometimes I don't have the time to do it otherwise, and then
right.
they always come up to me like, "Hey, got food." So
So
yeah,
you get cryptic basking and you get in that activity last hour, are they coming out in seek like are they seeking the light when they come out that last hour? Or are they just starting their evening rounds?
they're
Can you
starting
can you
if
comment on that?
yeah,
They're
yeah,
starting their evening rounds. They're not like going straight to the basking spot and going, "Oh, finally I get this." But
no,
they're not scared of the light. And that's
no.
you said including your morph animals. What morphs are you keeping in that environment?
I have a snow, so that's a combination of caramel and Oreo, and the caramel
Mhm.
part makes it light sensitive. I have a
Mhm.
caramel Sulu, caramel part makes it light sensitive, and an amel
Mhm.
gecko, and that's also a light sensitive. I also have a ghost, but I didn't notice any light sensitivity with her really. I heard they sometimes have it, but I didn't notice it with her. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I haven't seen much light sensitivity with my ghosts either. Not as much as not really any. Which I think they're more of a hypo rather than an albinism, to my
yeah,
understanding.
yeah.
Um,
That would make more sense. But
Cool.
yeah, I
Well,
first had
that's
in tubs because I was really concerned about the heating just fully blasting on them. But
uh-huh.
luckily, Arcadia, wow, butchering that pronunciation. But anyway,
No,
Arcadia
you got
launched,
it. That's it. Arcadia.
yay, launched Luminize, so then you can turn it off, turn it on, and that's really
So
nice.
that's a specific lamp that they have.
Yeah, and you can adjust it to your own liking to turn it up, turn it down. So
Look,
that's
Bubba's got a great question that Joe just threw up there. Are ghosts infertile?
yes,
To our knowledge, yes. Female visual ghosts are infertile. Males, there's no problem with the males, but as far as I know, all female visual ghosts are infertile. They cannot. They'll produce follicles and ovum, and you can pair them, and it'll look like eggs are developing, and then it'll just. Sometimes they can even have health issues, so it's kind of frowned upon to even try them because of that. So yeah, good question.
the
As
same with
well as
yeah,
caramel females, which Mariah was about to throw out there. Yep, caramel females as well. Um, so a lot of people don't even work with them because of that. I think that's kind of silly because people still like them. People will still buy the females as pets for fairly decent price, probably more than you would sell most other pet geckos. So I still produce a little bit of them. I'll definitely be producing a bit of ghosts here moving forward. But yeah, good
yeah.
question. Sorry to interrupt you. So let's move on. That's awesome info. Thank you very much for that breakdown. That's good to hear that cryptic basking isn't bullshit with this species, that they do use it. And yeah, cool. Let's move on to the humidity. You already mentioned a little bit of how you maintain it. What are you trying to maintain? Are you trying to maintain the whole enclosure to one humidity, or you have a hydro gradient just like you have a thermal gradient to where they have a humid corner and a drier corner? How do you work it?
I think, well, it's impossible for me to maintain a steady humidity all over the enclosure because water will naturally evaporate more easily on the warm side of the enclosure. So I just mist everything and I water the plants once a week. So then the overall humidity rises, but on the hot side, it's very quickly gone, quite a bit. So I do try to stay consistent with the substrate being a little bit damp, not entirely dried out. So that's the main thing that's stable, but the overall humidity is on the cooler side a little bit higher than on the
And do you have like a humid hide? Is what I call it. It's just like a little sauna box. Do you have something like that, or you just have just the general humidity of the enclosure?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Um, that's something that I think maybe the bridging the gap might help on the naturalistic side of things. That's something that a lot of the rat keepers use regularly is humid hides because we don't have the substrate in there to maintain the humidity. And that's something that even if you do a naturalistic style humid hide, um, what behaviors do you use? We'll get to that in a minute, Ella. On the you can do a similar style of humid hide, but that can give you a more dedicated humid like region, and then it'll kind of dissipate from there. I know that's what I do in my turtle enclosure. I keep one corner super wet, and then they have a little hiding place right there, a little cork round that they can go in, and then the other side is a lot drier. But anyway, um, that's but I'm sure you don't have any shedding issues or anything, huh?
no, I
To
that was actually funny.
necessitate.
I used to have shedding issues when I kept everything in tubs for a while, but not in my enclosures, never. Oh,
Okay,
so that's nice.
cool. Um, So somebody asked what kind of behavior differences I see. I see very similar behavior actually. They mine don't come out really much at all in the daytime, especially my light sensitive ones. Actually, whenever I come in the morning, one of my AML boys is always right in the front of his tub whenever I first get in, and I'm usually getting here about 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and I flip the lights on in that room, and he instantly just like closes his eyes, and within a few minutes he's gone. He just finds his way to his hide and he's gone. Um, So I see pretty similar behavior. They'll come out like, and it's really weird because I just moved into my shop about a year ago, and I'm still in the process of getting the lighting all like I want it to where it's all on a timer and really on a good cycle as far as the general ambient lighting in the rooms. But I have a pretty big window in the front, so it lights up the majority. Like right now, this is all daylight you're seeing coming in from the front. I got all my lights off in here to avoid glare. So what I'm getting at is even being in here and not having as direct of a light cycle as they did in the room they were in previous, they still seem to really have a good idea of when it's light and dark outside, and I've heard that from even people that keep their animals like in a basement setting where there aren't any windows at all, that it's like their animals still know what's up. And I don't, I'm sure there's a lot more science to that than that I'm not nearly smart enough to know about. But yeah, I see very similar. About an hour before sunset, I'll see them start to roam out, even if I'm still in there with the lights on. With the exception of that AML boy, I usually don't see him until it's lights out. But most of them are starting to roam around 8 o'clock, or if they hear me in there shaking crickets around, they're seeing what's up. Just kind of like you're saying,
Yeah.
but I just like, hey, what did I just hear? They really get to know those trigger sounds and know what's going on. Um, but yeah, very similar activity in my experience. Now, I don't have cameras and stuff. Do you have cameras in your cages to be able to see them all night, Mariah? No,
Sadly not.
I don't need. I don't either. I'm not that high tech.
No.
I'd like to. Um, and another reason I'm doing this and want to have this conversation is I want to set up a few bioactive and naturalistic style enclosures so that I am practicing it myself. And I'm going to do a little bit of an experiment with it and have like different nighttime lows in identical enclosures and put like identical age babies of about the same genetics in those three enclosures, and kind of do a little bit of a data, a research experiment, if you will, and collect some data of actual what these guys prefer.
Yeah.
Um, because and I'm actually kind of surprised to hear that you don't have a little bit more of a night drop in yours. Do you see that they use the cooler side a lot more, like at night when they're roaming around? Do they go hang out a lot on the cool side, like they're like would prefer that cooler side?
Usually they'll do like their whole exploring thing. They go all over the enclosure and then they return to their favorite height. They
Which
really
is
have.
usually their hot hide.
Yeah.
Every single one of them, that's their favorite hide.
Yeah.
And you have cool hides on the
Yeah.
cool side, right? And how
They
big are your enclosures?
they sometimes use it, but they always return eventually to their favorite safe spot, I guess.
How big are your enclosures, Mariah?
They're in centimeters, 80 by 40 by 40, which
Okay,
translates to 32 inches by 16 inches by 16 inches.
okay, that's a nice size enclosure. And you've got two stacks right there behind you. Is it that whole room that you're in is all full of those?
Yeah.
Okay. And how many adults are you keeping like that on that style enclosure?
I currently have 17 adult geckos and I keep 14 in naturalistic enclosures because I have one that's too young to go into their adult enclosure. I have one that's still in quarantine, and I have one that's unfortunately a bit stressed out and has lost some weight due to that. So she's in recovery. So
Okay.
those are the exceptions, but overall they're all in the enclosures.
Awesome. And what exactly lighting wise are you using? I know you kind of briefed over it earlier, but let's get into like the specifics of it. What's the exact UVB that you're running?
I have the luminized 7% shade dweller UVB and the LED light with the color temperature color of 3500K because that's the same color as sunlight is supposed to be.
Okay. And that's plant light right there, right? The LED light, that's for the
Yeah,
plants.
yeah.
Okay. And then what heat lamp are you running?
A halogen heat lamp on a dimming thermostat.
Halogen, and what wattage in that setting? I know every application is different. What are you
35.
using?
Yeah,
35 watt in those
these,
enclosures,
these lamps are insanely efficient.
right?
So I only use 35 watt, and then on a dimming thermostat, because sometimes it gets uh, a little bit too hot, and then the dimming thermostat can maintain that. So that was
And
yeah.
then you have, I know this isn't lighting, but just as far as heat sources, then you have like a 4x6 under tank heater on the hot side. And how do you run that? You have that just inside the enclosure
Yeah, on
with a slate on top of it, or what's your setup there?
I have the substrate on top of that.
Okay. And how much substrate are you looking at on top of that? Like a couple inches,
Yeah,
about 2 inches,
quite a few inches.
or centimeters rather.
Yeah, I
And
think
then
3, 4 centimeters. I have no idea how much it is
okay.
in.
Um, and okay. So I think that covers it on lighting. Anybody else have any other setup, any lighting questions? Please hit them in the comments. What's up, Nick? Look, that's the grandfather, godfather of Fat Tails right there, guys. He's been doing it for longer than any of us. When we were all in diapers, Nick was breeding fat tails. Like that's fact. Um, so check it out. Next thing I want to go over is, and I'm just going through what I talk to people about. What's the most important whenever I'm explaining a setup for them? Um, Supplementation. What's your regimen on supplementation? And by the way, as far as heating everything, I 100% agree with your ranges. 90 to 92 is what I always tell people hotspot. Anything below 90 for their daytime hotspot, I really find they have issues. I don't think night drops should be any lower than 77. And that's based off of actual info that I've gotten from those advancing husbandry groups of saying brumation should be 66 to 77. That tells me that you need to be above brumation temp for your typical nighttime lows. If you want to simulate a brumation, awesome. Fast and properly, graduate into it as far as your temps go, and do a brumation. If you're not trying to do a brumation, then don't go down that low. So anyway, on the supplementation, what do you do? Uh, yeah,
Um,
and that's a good question too, Ella. What's your day and night cycle hour wise,
yeah,
Mariah?
so the heat lamp and the luminize are turned on at 9 a.m. and they turn off at 9 p.m. And the luminize is first set at 25%, and then they're at 100% at 12 p.m. and until 3 p.m. And then after that, they gradually go down to 25% again. And the LED LEDs are only on from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m.
Okay.
So that's
And
on.
again, that the LEDs are just for the really bright high daylight and for your plants.
Yeah,
And you don't see many fat tails out during that time of day at all, for
not
the most
really,
part.
other
Maybe
than
a little,
Christmas
maybe a
past.
little bit of cryptic basking, if anything.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Um, and then okay, supplementation. What's your supplementation?
I use vitamin. Like, wait, let me say this good in English. I use calcium powder plus vitamin D3.
Yep. Yep. So even with the UVB, you still use the D3. I agree with that, and I
Yeah,
actually, my friend Mariah that I was talking to yesterday also agreed with that because you don't want to not provide it and they not be using the UVB and then they not get the D3. Like it's one of those things. Like it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
yeah.
Um,
It's
and then
very
do you
hard.
use?
Sorry,
No,
it's
go
very
ahead. What?
hard to get overdosage of that stuff, and
Yeah, that's
uh,
really a myth. That's from back in the day when they first started using D3 and it was way higher concentration. Now there's trace elements in there in the supplements we use today, and D3 overdose is not a thing anymore.
exactly,
Um, it,
and
in
especially for
in
my
very
breeding
many cases.
females. Oh, sorry.
No, no, go ahead. Especially for your breeder females. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
they really need it.
they need it. They
Um,
need the extra stuff. They need all they can get during breeding
yeah.
season. So I
And I
just
say D3 overdose is not a thing. D3 overdose is not a thing in nocturnal geckos. I mean, I've heard of certain hyper, issues in some diurnal animals, but that's animals that are soaking in the sunlight all day and on D3, and that kind of conundrum. Um, Multivitamin. Do you use multivitamin?
no. To be honest, no. I have, but that's mainly because I don't have enough knowledge about that yet. So
Okay, look, Bubba's got good info there because he keeps iguanas, so he's got some intel there. In naturalistic setups, any excess D3 will be metabolized with UV. I'm guessing he was typing there. No overdose. Okay, cool. Yeah.
yeah, makes
Um,
sense.
that's and that's kind of what the gist I've got. And I'm sorry, multivitamin. What are you using? Are you using multivitamin?
No,
No, not at all.
no.
Okay. And you're not seeing any. What brand calcium are you using?
I use a mixture of Arcadia and let me see. So Matt. Yeah,
Zoomed.
yeah.
Okay, but neither one of them has any multivitamin in them.
No, I don't
Okay.
think. Maybe the Arcadia. I'm not sure about that.
Okay. Well, now that brings me right to my next question because if you're not using any multivitamin, then I want to know what you're gut loading with because that's
Um,
uh, got to be on point to not be able to use any multivitamin without any issues.
I use a variety of different vegetables, and
Okay.
I use the insecti fuel from Arcadia Pro.
Okay. So this is not an Arcadia commercial, guys. Just so
No, I
everybody's
just use it
aware.
because it's available.
Nobody's sponsored by Arcadia. They're welcome to send us money if they want, or product, but no deals have been made with Arcadia before this episode.
No,
So Arcadia gut load and what kind of Flintstones vitamins, right, Bubba?
um,
What kind of veggies are you using, Mariah?
all kinds of different vegetables. I sometimes use it's not kale, but a kind of it's andivie called in the Netherlands. It's very rich in all different kinds of stuff. I can Google it if you want.
No,
I
that's good.
use carrots.
Dark dark leafy greens though, mostly
Yeah,
for
yeah,
your
yeah.
okay.
Dark leafy
Okay.
greens, carrots, paprika, anything.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and in the Arcadia insecta fuel, it has vitamin B1, vitamin B2, vitamin B12, vitamin K, and some other ingredients that are not vitamins.
And out of curiosity, how many years have you been producing baby fat tails? You said you
Years.
started working with them about 4 years ago. You've been breeding. You've been producing for 4 years as
Yeah.
well.
No, no, only 2 years. I am not very
2 years.
experienced with reading that. So, by all means, if you have any tips
No,
and tricks on how to
I'm.
do
That's
vitamins,
why I'm. No, that's why
I'm
I'm
not
quizzing you
prepared.
because I've had issues in my experience without having the multivitamin. Like I use a lot of multivitamin, and so I'm quizzing you because I'm curious. Like if you've not seen any issues, I'm trying to figure out is it because she's got these badass setups that have the UVB and all the heat penetrative light and maybe they're able to process their own vitamins that they're not able to process in a rack setup because they don't have the whole gamut of everything. So I'm not trying to beat you down when I'm asking all these questions. It's 20 questions
I
because
know.
I'm trying to really understand what's going on. So out of those 2 years, how many babies have you produced? Would I like a dozen or
Yeah, a dozen would
you
be.
don't have to give an exact number, but like
Yeah, around a dozen to
hundred
20.
around a dozen total or each year?
Yeah, each year.
Each year. Okay, so about 25 babies roughly. Um,
Not a lot.
I personally would recommend adding some multivitamin into your routine. That's with that said, if you haven't seen any issues at all, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? But also, you're not looking at a huge sample size with that many babies, right?
No, no.
So, especially if you start seeing any kind of like jaw deformities or eye deformities or anything like that, I would definitely jump on some multivitamin. I feed multivitamin as much as I feed calcium almost with my fat tails. My
All right.
Leos get it a lot less, but my fat tails get pretty much like basically a 1-to-2 ratio of multivitamin to calcium, like every feeding.
That's
Um, that's just how I operate. And again, I'm not trying to, oh, this is what you need to do. Again, guys, there's a million different ways to keep every species that you have as long as things are working right, as long as your animals are doing well.
no, but
You know,
to add a little on that, this is exactly why we don't need to bash breeders who have been doing this for years. This is exactly the reason because as a naturalistic keeper, you are never done learning. I am absolutely 100% certain of
As
that.
any
I
keeper,
still
as
make
any keeper, you're never done
still need
learning.
to learn. And this stuff, like, you would not easily read about this in a care sheet, because this is also very relatable to breeding, because you would not see issues very quickly. But if there's a time to see it, is during breeding, because it takes such an extra toll. And just, yeah, so
And if we see that they need it in breeding, then why wouldn't they need it in any case, right? So why wouldn't we give it to our animals that are just long-term pets if they obviously need it, right?
yeah.
So look, there's Nick with his knowledge. I gotta load fresh mixed veggies and use Repcal brand. Yeah, but you don't know what you're talking about, Nick. Go to sleep, man. Um, uh, no, that all that's such important aspects. Gut loading, I feel like, is the most important thing about keeping insectivorous reptiles, however you want to say that. Whenever I'm at expos, every single person that walks up to my table, I ask them if they have geckos at home. If their answer is yeah, I've got a Leo or a fat tail or whatever, anything insectivorous, I ask them what they feed their gecko. I really don't care what they feed their gecko, and I don't ask them what their gecko's name is because I definitely don't care about that. I want to know. I want to get to the next question because once they tell me what they feed their gecko, then my next question is, what do you feed your worms or your crickets or your dubia or whatever that answer was? And 90% of the time, with the exception of Denver, Colorado, Denver, you are the most educated area that I have vended at yet. Denver was about 60%. But everywhere else, it's 90% of the time I get a blank stare and they say, we don't feed them anything. We get them from pet store and we give them that calcium dust. They'll tell me that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right. And now this is the critical point, guys. If y'all want to learn how to like be at an expo, the critical point in the conversation is right there. Because at that point, you have two options. You can either talk to them like they're an idiot and get them to turn away and go, oh, I'm not listening to anything that guy says. He just pissed me off. Or you can handle it in a way that is like, well, can I help you? You know what I mean? Would you be willing to let me help you? And my line that I use is I reach over to my care sheet and I go, well, would you mind if I handed you a little bit of extra info because you can never have too much knowledge and knowledge is power, right? And when you tell people something like that, it kind of catches them off guard and they're like, oh, yeah, I guess you're kind of right. Knowledge is power. And sure, why not? I'll take some more knowledge. And they open up a little bit to you, right? They open up their eyes and they open up their mind and they open up their physical being to you. Like they're more willing to have the conversation with you. And then you can go into and I hand them my care sheet and I point out, I'm like, look, this first section of my care sheet is about gut loading, and it takes up a third of my care sheet, gut loading and supplementation. So, how important do you think that is to me? And I ask them that question. I try to get them thinking about it and engaging, and then I go into exactly what I gut load with. And this is not people I'm selling to, guys. This is every freaking person that walks across my table that have a gecko at home. And by doing that, I feel like I'm saving geckos' lives every freaking weekend. I
Yeah.
go home, even if I don't sell hardly any animals, I go home thinking, oh, I kicked ass there. I just taught all kind of people how to do better. Maybe not my way, maybe not the best way, but if they weren't doing anything and they only absorbed gut loading from me whenever they were standing in front of me for 5 or 10 minutes, then I did my part, I feel like, and I got that little bit of better nutrition in their animal. Because even if they're not, and that's why I asked you about gut loading as soon as you say you weren't using multivitamin, because even if they're not using the multivitamin that I think they should be, or even the calcium that they should be, if they're gut loading like a madman, like just a ninja, you don't have to use any of that stuff a lot of times because those insects are going to be so incredibly nutritious that it's just going to it's going to pass right along into the animals.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really important. I feel like I personally, again, if I were you, I would incorporate a little bit of multivitamin, especially for your breeder females. It can't hurt because a lot, like Bubba said, most times any excess just gets passed through, and my
Yeah.
vet has told me that as well.
Absolutely.
Excess, just like with us, if we take too many vitamins or whatever, too much vitamin C, we'll just piss it out. It just goes through us. Um, what was Bubba's question there, Joe? I missed the first part of it.
Let's
But
see. It
how
says
are
it
naturalistic
says Mariah.
behaviors? That's a good question too.
Alrighty. All right. So my geckos do a little bit of everything. They dig in their favorite heights. At night, they will climb the backgrounds of the enclosure. And what is funny to share is they always poop at the same spot. I'm sure sets geckos do it as well. But most of my geckos go all the way up to the background, find a corner all the way up in the enclosure, and then do their thing there. And
What piglets? They don't even give the bugs a chance to get to. Do you keep isopods? Do you keep isopods for breakdown? No.
they die. I just spot clean everything myself because, yeah, they die.
Okay. Why do you think that is? Why do you think they're dying? Did the geckos eat them, or you just they're just not keeping a good population on their own?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think
Okay.
because there are some spots of substrate that get quite dry, and then they are of course going to that specific spot is the best place to be. So then they die, or they drown in the water dish. So it's a
Yeah, I
little
see that a lot too.
bit of both.
So that might go back to my recommendation of maybe trying to have a more like localized corner as a like humid hide, whether that be on your cool side. With you as warm as temps as you're keeping at night, you could do it on your cool side,
Yeah,
but to have like a humid burrow, I think you would have a lot more success with your isopods, and they're not going to be going into the water bowl as much because they're going to have the hydration they need in that humid corner. Does that make sense?
yeah, that does.
That's one thing I always recommend to people anytime they're doing bioactive is to have, just like we have a temperature gradient, you want to have if you have a big enough enclosure, you want to have a humidity gradient if possible,
Yeah,
and that's one way to do that is to have like a humid facility in one of the corners, and then from there, the opposite corner obviously is your dryer corner.
yeah.
Um, so let's see. Next, I guess let's talk about hatchling care. Whenever you hatch a baby, do you just throw it in this big 30-gallon setup that you have all naturalistic and say, I hope you work out, wish you well, see you in a few weeks, hope you can find your crickets, or do you have a more dedicated method to raising your hatchlings?
I have a very simple setup for my hatchlings actually that I can show you. I keep my babies in this rack setup with tubs, and I
Okay.
just keep them paper towels in there and just feed them crickets every day.
And are they on, you have heat running on the back of those tubs, or is that just room temp? How do you keep those?
On the underside of the tubs, I have the heating, and then on
On the
both sides.
very back, on the very back on the bottom?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And what temp do you keep those at? Same temp, 92?
A little bit warmer, actually. I think
Same.
94. A little
Okay.
bit warmer.
Yep. I do the
And
same with my youngsters, with my little bitty ones. I find especially the ones that are getting sprayed every day.
yeah,
Because when you add humidity to the environment, you're going to lose a little bit of temperature, right? So it feels the opposite. It feels like it's warmer, but you actually it has the opposite effect.
yeah,
So I keep my babies at about 94, 95 degrees. That way, even when I spray them in the morning and it cools down to the 70-degree water temp that I just sprayed in there, it's a little bit quicker recovery, back to that 90-degree
yeah.
plus mark that I think they like.
I do.
And then you have that just on the back of the tub to where they have a cool side on the front, right, to where they can escape from that heat if they want.
Yeah,
So it's identical setups then,
yeah.
hatchling wise.
And
I use shoebox tubs
yeah,
with heat in the back.
they're like this size.
Yeah.
So that's yeah,
Yep.
nothing special really. And then I had a whole pack last year, and then I waited until she was 6 months until I upgraded her to a bigger enclosure. So she was already quite big, super
And
little.
did you go straight to your 30-inch 30 by 16s, or did
Yeah,
you go into intermediate? Yeah, straight to the 30.
yeah.
Okay.
And that worked
So
very well. At first, uh, I fed her with tweezers to make sure she was adjusting well and to make sure that she was eating well. And after that, it got going. So yeah.
But you already knew the gecko really well. You had her for 6 months. You hatched her. You knew that she was healthy. And
Exactly.
that's what I always tell everybody as well. Whenever they're talking about wanting to go bioactive with the gecko they're getting from me, is like, first of all, quarantine is a good practice. No matter if this is your first
Yep.
reptile or not, it's a good thing to get in the practice of.
Yeah.
And it allows you to have a closer observation that allows you more, um, more direct observation of their food intake and their poop outtake and all that good stuff
Yeah.
for the first couple months. And what I
Yes.
tell people is after 3 months, once you've educated yourself by watching good stuff like this, or reading good care sheets that don't have ridiculous lows on them,
Yeah.
then which, by the way, guys, Reptifiles, her care sheet, which is a bioactive based care sheet, I've talked with her and she's going to make an adjustment on hers. Her care sheet will be correct. So we're going to move forward with her care sheet, in the future as far as recommendations, or Mariah's, obviously. Um,
I'd be happy.
but that naturalistic setup to throw a new animal in there, even if it's an adult, and you don't know that animal, and especially if you've never had that species, I think you're running a risk regardless, because you don't know what to look for. You don't know what you're trying to look for. You don't know what they should act like because you've never had one.
Yeah.
So I always tell people, like, start out like this, simple Simon. I actually sell these little starter kits that are really simple for very affordable prices. And then that gives you some time to really educate yourself further and figure out exactly how you want to do things. And but that's an important point, is even especially babies, but even newer adults that you bring in need to be on a more simple setup to be able to
Yeah.
observe them properly.
I
Um, let's see. Supplemental heat. I'm just looking at my notes right here. Supplemental heat retention. So, do you have any heat retention material in your enclosures the way you have them set up? Do you have like slate rock stacked up underneath your heat source, or what are you doing there?
No, I don't. My enclosure material is very isolating, and that keeps the warmth in. And I my personal opinion is that the natural substrate in the wild doesn't have these weird flat rocks, so I don't use them myself. It just wouldn't make sense to me. I do have fake termite mounts that are made of expanding foam, so that's also a little bit of isolation going on there, and that's on the warm side of the enclosure. So that's the only type of isolation I got going on, but not.
How did you make those?
I had a flower pot, and then I put a shitload of expanding foam on it, and then I put towel glue on it, and then I threw all kinds of substrate on it. So I can show you.
That's a good question, Ella. While she gets that, I'm going to answer Ella's question as far as how I operate. I don't have a night drop for my hatchlings. My room does cool off a little bit at night, so they have a little bit of a night drop just from the natural environment. Oh, that's cool.
Same. Yeah,
That's neat. So you put it on some wax paper to make it, and then you just like carved holes out of it, or
yeah. I tried to be just really messy and looked at Dave Kaufman's video to
I love it. That's
yeah,
cool.
to create that.
Neat. And that's their preferred hide for the most part, for most of them.
For about 60%.
Okay,
My geckos.
cool.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess my next question, because this is the question or the accusation that the advancing husbandry keepers are going to make, is: do you think that if you had more insulating heat retention material in your enclosure, that you would not need the supplemental heat pad that you're using?
No, absolutely not. I When I first started keeping veto geckos, or one veto gecko, I did have those weird flat slates, and it actually got colder during the night. That is insane to say to these people, maybe, but yes, it gets warm during the day. It's a nice warm slate, but yeah, if it cools down, the stone gets stone cold. So no, I would
Good
not say
point.
it's not necessary to have any heat if you use a slate.
Okay. And I'll lean back on my point of, like, in the wild, these termite mounds retain this heat that they absorbed all day, and now we need to try to replicate that. And whenever our lights go out at 8 p.m. and our house is 70 degrees, it doesn't take very long, maybe a few hours, for that enclosure, even with a proper hide stack of heat retention material, it
Yeah,
doesn't take long for that heat to dissipate from that material. And then in a matter of hours, your entire enclosure is 70 degrees
I
and your
agree.
fat tail's roaming around, wondering why it's winter every freaking night.
Yeah,
And I just really want to stress that and try to, hopefully some of these naysayers are going to see this and realize and understand that I'm not like just talking out of my ass, and like I kind of have an idea what I'm dealing with here. It's really important to try to mimic that heat retention that they have in the wild. And in the wild, there's no way that those termite mounds are dropping very quickly during the night. If it happens a few months out of the year, again, if you want to brumate, cool, but not every night. And so to me, an under tank heater used the right way on a thermostat, only at night, however you want to slice it, a under tank heater used the right way in combination with a heat lamp. And this is exactly what my video was about a couple days ago that everybody was like, oh, you're crazy. I think that's the best combo, exactly what you're doing, because at night when that heating pad kicks on, that's mimicking that ground heat
yeah,
that's holding in the wild. And without that, in some degree, and you can do it on a different, you can do that on like a graduating timer if you want, or have it only kick on in the latter part of the evening, or in the first part of the evening, but not in the latter part of the evening, whatever.
yeah.
Anything is better than nothing. But I
But
can't stress enough how much I feel like we really, really need people to understand that, especially these babies, need that nighttime temp. And somebody, Ella asked an important question earlier about the baby drop, if we drop our babies.
so,
And I quickly answered, no, I keep my babies. They automatically have a small nighttime drop because of the room cooling down. But furthermore, whenever Dave on that Dave Kaufman video, I not to keep pointing back to this one resource, but it's one of the best resources we have. Whenever they harvested those babies, they were very new babies, yes, but they were in that mound at night. They
yeah,
weren't out roaming around in the cool nighttime air. They were still buried in that mound that I was just talking about is retaining heat. So for my babies, I do not have much of a night drop at all. Yes, Bubba's right. You can use, if you have a quality thermostat, you can program a night drop in there, to where, like I was talking about, using the conjunction of heat lamp and heat under tank heater, you can really use these tools at your disposal in a very efficient way if you think outside the box and
yeah,
not just like, oh, well, this is, what this care sheet said, so I'm going to do that. And that's one thing, like, I'm really not a huge fan of care sheets as much as I hand them out. I don't think there's one black and white way to do these things, but I still hand the care sheets out because I need people to have at least some way, to focus on and get started. And then again, they can learn from there, but we've got to get them started off on the right foot. Otherwise, they're going to have an unsuccessful experience and go, oh, fat tails are too hard. I'm not messing with them.
yeah.
Um,
I agree.
and it's just, they're not that much harder. You just can't have the same level of error you can for a Leo. That's all there is to it. For a
Yeah,
Leo, you can have that night drop because in Afghanistan, so foothill regions where those animals live a lot, it cools off pretty significantly at night. And they don't have necessarily as big a deep burrows that they constantly live in to be able to escape to. So yeah, I think it's a much more feasible setup for a leopard gecko, and I think that's a lot of the information gap. Is a lot of these care sheets are just leopard gecko care sheets, myself included, that are just converted like, oh, and this is different for AFTs. Like that's all. I have a care sheet that says Leo and AFT care sheet, and then in certain spots I'll have in parentheses this for fat tails, just
yeah.
as far as like the temperature range being tighter and the humidity needing to be a little bit higher, and them needing a little bit more access to fresh water. um so yeah, that's my deal on that. So Mariah, Clint just asked, what's your favorite AFT morph?
Yeah, we need to catch up on quite a few questions. I think Ella was
Yeah,
first.
right, we're just
Um,
rambling.
yeah, I don't drop my hatchling temperatures at all.
Okay.
Yeah, so that I keep that one stable because hatchlings are just way more fragile than adults, and I don't mess with that. So yeah.
And
Um,
then is 20 degrees Celsius too cold at night, you think? What is 20 degrees in Fahrenheit? That's about what, 70
uh,
roughly?
I don't
You
know.
got
I
you
can
got your
go.
converter out still?
Uh, Let me Google it.
Google that shit.
68. It is a little on the cold side, yeah.
68. Yeah, that's a little bit. In my opinion, that's too cold. I would not get below 75 Fahrenheit for cool temps. That's my recommendation. I just don't see any need for it. Again, other than if you want to simulate brumation a few months out of the year. But as far as all year long, 75 is a minimum nighttime temp for me. That's my recommendation. What's your favorite morph? What I?
There's a reason I have 17 geckos. And I couldn't pick one. But I do have a weak spot for patternless somehow because I have four patternless out of my 17 geckos. So unconscious, subconsciously, I might
It's
have.
happening, right? It's just that
Yeah,
way.
I like the patternless morph, but if you ask me tomorrow, I like I don't know, ghost, Zulu, whiteout Zulu. Yeah, it's hard to say a favorite. What about
Yeah,
you?
that's a good point, Bubba. Care guide, you still got to find your way. It's just a guide. It's just a starter. It's not a Bible. My favorite morph, Mariah. You know my favorite morph. Come on, you have to know my favorite morph.
Whiteout? Question
Yes, yes, of course. Whiteout. Whiteout is my favorite morph, 100%. Mango Project Whiteout to be exact, which is just a project. Everybody,
are
it's
amazing.
just some tangy whiteouts with a lot of lavenders that hold in there. But yeah, whiteout's definitely my favorite morph because of the variety that it expresses. Because you can have one whiteout that throws just so many different offspring, and it visual on the visual palette, it just has a lot of different variety. I think. And I'm working on AML Ghost. Hopefully, those will be cool. My
Yeah,
vision is a fluorescent purple and orange gecko because the ghosts have a lot of actual lavender in their banding, not like the white that people call lavender, but actual lavender. And then if the tangerine amel background comes through, then that should be fluorescent orange, right? Like
yeah.
in
I think
theory.
so.
So yeah, that's my thought on an amel ghost is it's going to be a fluorescent purple and orange fat tail. That's going to be cool, right? Um,
Yeah,
got a bunch of those growing, but a bunch of double and triple hets growing out of those. I got some patty het amel ghosts and some triple het amel ghost patties and all kind of
nice.
cool stuff. So yeah, that's my favorite morph. What do we have any more questions before I go on to like what I had written down? I had jotted down some notes.
I don't see any
Did we get all
question.
the questions? I don't have it open. My ADD is killing me. Um, so I'm gonna go through real quick. I had just jotted down like the benefits that I think of rat keeping, and then some of the drawbacks, in my opinion, from my experience. Um, the main benefit, obviously, is it's the most controlled environment we can have. So whenever you've got high capacity of animals that you're trying to work with, it's the best way, not just the easiest or cheapest way. It's the best way to be able to keep a large amount of animals clean and well observed and be able to know exactly what's going in and coming out of them without too much guesswork, right?
Yeah,
Um, and along with that is the space that it allows to be able to keep a large quantity of animals, to be able to have a good genetic diversity.
yeah.
Because
Jump on
being
another.
a super, what's that?
Can I jump in for one quick
Yes,
second?
please, please, please.
Something that a lot of people really don't realize is how much animals it takes to have a project going on. Like for me,
Yes,
it's very straightforward. But I want to create some Zulus now. I have a female that's Zulu. I have a male that's Zulu. Ta-da, Zulus. But for a black velvet project or a high quality mango project, you need a really big breeding group to have that strong lineage while still preventing inbreeding issues. And I think really people don't see that, people don't realize that. But I can guarantee
exactly.
if I had 100 enclosures, I wouldn't be able to maintain the same level of care for all of my geckos. That
Right.
would be impossible. So I think
Yeah.
that's what a lot of people forget.
No, that's exactly the point I was about to make, Mariah, is that in order to be able to provide the correct, in my opinion, the correct genetic diversity that needs to be provided in these projects, you have to have a big, sample size and a lot of, several animals to be able to work with. And that's not to say that every animal's a number or it's all about the money or any of that nonsense. That's just to say, like, in my ethically bound way that I'm determined to do this, I want to make sure that I'm selling people animals that are going to be, uh, you know, good potential projects for them and project animals for them, and not something that is already so inbred that they can't do anything with if they want to try to breed and do their own kind of projects.
Exactly.
The only way to do that, in my opinion, is to have the space to be able to keep the amount of animals to be able to do those bigger projects.
Yeah.
And if that's not your thing and you want to just only have a handful of animals and be on a much smaller scale, that's awesome. Make sure that your foundation animals are very unrelated, and you can probably get away with quite a bit of that even on a small scale. Or
Yeah.
just don't keep very much. Like, you only kept one holeback, you said, so far, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what I'd do if I had to pick only one holeback a year. It would drive me insane. Um, so that's kind of the main point there, is that, like, a lot of people frown upon rat keeping and frown upon breeders and bigger breeders and how they do things. And I certainly agree that there's a lot of improvement to be made in the breeder side of things, and I'm personally working to improve my ways of keeping every day. And like you said earlier, you say keepers don't stop learning. Anybody doesn't stop learning. You said naturalistic keepers. If you stop learning, then you're going down the wrong road. I really feel like anytime you stop, yearning for that new information, you're doing yourself a disservice. But anyway, that's just my gist on it. I feel like you really need to have a lot of space for genetic diversity if you're going to try to do big long-term projects.
Yes.
And without that, you're setting yourself up, or you're setting either yourself or your clients or customers up for failure by passing on faulty genetics that haven't been as outcrossed as I feel like they should. Again, this is just my opinion. I feel like there's too much inbreeding going on in reptiles in general.
Yeah.
People just don't care about it because it's just been done for so many years. I think that it's just like an afterthought for a lot of people, especially some of the older school keepers that I hang out with at some of the shows, and I spend some time with. Like, it's even less of, more of an afterthought for them, because it's just what they always did. Because back whenever they were first getting reptiles in, you got a pair into the country, and that was the founding pair, and the only way to propagate them was to inbreed, right? There was
Yeah.
no other way. So I get it. I understand where it came from, but with certain species like the fat tails, we have plenty of genetic diversity available. So why not use it? Why not? Like, I've got a lot of wild caught lines in my projects that I'm like constantly injecting into things to make sure that I've always got fresh genetics running through there. I've got visual Oreos, visual amels, all kind of visuals that have a lot of wild caught blood in them.
Yeah.
And that's part of that quest for, like, having the most robust, healthy animals. Um, Nick mentioned something about brumation, and Bubba was kind of chiming in on it a little bit too. Yeah, brumation is actually something I think I'm going to try a little bit more of this year, Nick, because this last season for me has been a little bit hit or miss. So I think I'm gonna probably pick your brain about that a little bit and see exactly what you do. Um, yeah, yeah, agreed. Everybody's geckos are too damn fat. Brumation gives you better and more babies. Let's talk about that for a minute. That's a good point, Bubba. Obesity in reptiles. It is far, far too common.
Yeah.
People, and I get it. A lot of people, when they get reptiles, one of the funnest things about having reptiles is feeding them and watching them eat and watching them chase their bugs around and shake their little tail. I get it. Okay. But you need to really take notice of what these animals are supposed to look like. With all these, again, back to the naturalistic keeping. Some of those naturalistic keepers that I see posting their animals in their naturalistic setups basking in the sunlight are very obese.
Yeah. I agree.
If you're going to try to keep them as close to natural as possible, feed them less, because in the wild they're having to struggle a little bit. And if you see a wild fat tail, they are rare. I don't know where they got their name from originally, other than the bulbous tails that they regrow, because in the wild none of them have very fat tails unless they have a regrow. So yeah, that's a perfect example. Look how
Yeah.
lean that animal is.
I agree.
Not
This
a
is
big, huge
what I
fat
love.
tail. Um,
And then the
So yeah.
females during breeding season, I have them a little bit fatter because they can lose some weight, but that's that's a little bit of a different situation, in my opinion.
So I'm gonna run through this list real quick, and then we'll jump on to something else. We got a little bit of time left, and we don't necessarily have to end at any certain time. But I know you have time constraints because it's getting late over there. So you just let me know when you want to wrap this up. Um,
I'm awake.
you're what? You're good.
Yeah,
All right. Some of the other benefits to racks, they're super easy to clean. You can really have a good sterile environment, way different than in the naturalistic setups. Which again, if you have a smaller collection, that's probably not as big of a deal. But if you have a really big collection, like I have grown to have, it's pretty important to be able to be nice and clean and sterile, especially when you're moving animals in and out, or selling animals and then got fresh babies coming up into the new tubs. You want to be able to sterilize things really, act really well. Um,
yeah,
that's a good question. How long do 15 bios take to clean? Hang on, let me finish this real quick. And I already mentioned, the easy to observe the intake and output of your animals in the racks. That's important to me, especially during breeding season when I have females. I need to know if they're eating or not. And if
yeah,
crickets are going and hiding behind something and I don't realize it, and those females didn't eat that week, guys, listen, these fat tails can go down so fast and so hard.
yeah,
I mean, it does not take much more than a missed couple meals in the right time of their season, and you've all of a sudden got a fat tail on death's door. They are very, very fragile, and I
yeah,
can't stress that enough. That's the biggest difference in my eyes between breeding Leos and fat tails is that the fat tails, they just, I don't know what it is. It's usually around the third clutch of the season. If they're not on point, they will just crash hard. And I've seen it time and time again. It's not just one animal, it's not just a group of animals. It's like just randomly sometimes if they miss a couple meals, they just and it's hard to bring them back sometimes. So that's my reasons for liking using racks. Drawbacks, they're very basic. They lack stimulus, obviously. A lot of people try to. Ella's one that does kind of a hybrid, rack setup. She does tubs, but she has substrate and leaf litter, and she tries to get as naturalistic as she can in that tub setup. Now, I assume she's not using basking lamps, so she's, in many people's eyes, she's missing the mark there. But she's doing way better than I am. I have, a pretty basic hide or a pretty basic tub with a nice hide in the right spot, a nice adequate humid hide, and a decent sized piece of cork bark for every gecko. That way they have some texture differences. They have some, that cork bark will kind of rock around a little bit when they climb on it. So it's not just super laboratory basic, but it's not much. It's a lot less than a lot of other people keep. And that's one thing I'm trying to improve on, is trying to, and that's part of this conversation is me trying to figure out exactly what direction I want to go with my collection, because I plan to downsize a little bit and try to focus a little bit more on elevating my enclosures and having that a little bit more um, geared towards you know the animal's
yeah,
overall enrichment, and not just, okay, they're super healthy and I don't have any shed issues and everybody's breeding well, so let's call it good.
yeah,
I'm not that easily satisfied personally. So they're basic. They are sometimes inconsistent. If you have too big of a rack trying to run off of a single thermostat channel, you will get a pretty wide range of temps. Like the very bottom and top might be 88 degrees and the middle might be 94 degrees. If you have a good idea of what you're dealing with and you don't have a very cold room, then that 88-degree mark isn't a big deal. Um, but conversely, if you have a pretty hot room, that 94-degree mark without any kind of significant cool down could be a little bit too much to heat stress those geckos. So it's a fine balance there. Sometimes they can be inconsistent if you don't have like a really nice professionally made rack that's not overloading a single channel. You got to really dedicate your channels. Don't be shy about doing, plenty of channels per rack or per set of racks. And we can get into that more later on another video. Just that's kind of a rundown there. And they're freaking ugly. They're ugly compared to, like, I went to my friend Brittany's collection a while back. She's a Heartbeat Reptiles. Go check her out, guys. She's got one of the most versatile, eclectic or just awesome collections that I've ever seen. But I went and checked out her collection. I was blown away. She's got, I mean, nice, beautiful enclosures for almost every animal, and like just her enclosures alone make you just flabbergasted. Much less the animals that are within them. So that's somebody that I've kind of like seen how she's doing it, and I'm trying to like figure out how to get in that direction. Even if I don't go all the way that she has set up, everybody's different, everybody's needs are different, everybody's animals needs are different, but I'm really jealous of how she's doing things. She makes me feel like a piece of shit, honestly. She's just killing it.
Well, I
But so that's a big thing for me is visually appealing. They're not that visually appealing. You can see my racks over my shoulder back here. It's just a room of tubs. It's nothing impressive. The animals in them are really impressive, but it's not that awe inspiring to see a room of tubs. It's like, oh, that's a bunch of geckos, but that's about it. Um, Anyway, that's it. That's all I had on notes. We can
uh,
just kind of go
I
from there.
You can easily implement one easy thing, maybe to enhance your Rex a little bit without chasing
Yep.
them too much. I don't know,
Okay.
just food for thought. But
No, please.
I use different kind of textures in my tubs. So I have the paper towels, and then I have some fake plants. These are easy to clean, whatever. That's a different texture. And then I have the simple plastic hide, of course, and the
Right.
humid. And then I have these little pieces of cork bark,
Yep.
which are also, yeah, just a different texture. I think fato geckos do a lot of thing by uh, flicking their tongue against different kind of objects to kind of explore, and I think that will be a way to easily enrich uh, tanks racks in that way. Just
Yeah.
thought.
No,
That's
I agree. I've fairly recently, like in the last year, started incorporating at least cork bark into all my tubs. I don't have the fake plants in there, but I have the cork bark, and they have all of my geckos have a humid hide, so they all have dirt to be able to dig in and have that sensation. But no, I agree that the more textures you can get in there, the better. What's up, Joe? Uh,
I've been here the whole time.
so
I've just been kind of in the background so you guys could
oh yeah,
focus. It's going
for
really
sure.
well. A lot of good information.
Is there anything you can think of that we have not gone over,
we have
or
one
that you were hoping that we talked about? What, Marai?
we have one missed question.
Oh, what is it? I'm
Gecko.
glad you're watching because I can't do two things at once. My ADD is too intense. Um.
Yeah, it's actually my question. So you had talked
Oh yeah.
about um, cleaning racks and how it's a little bit quicker. I did wonder how long. I kind of guesstimated you clean about 15 of those things, and I was wondering how long does that take?
And how often
Yeah,
do you do it?
I clean 3 times a week. So the spot cleaning and the water bowls to make sure they're clean, because the water bowls get algae in them if I don't change them often enough, because light and LED and shit. So that I do 3 times a week, and the feeding I do also 3 times a week, and then every other day I miss the enclosures, and once a week I will water the plants. And I don't exactly measure it, but I think everything about maintenance costs me a couple of hours each time I'm in the enclosure room. So
Okay.
that's quite a few hours I spend every week to keep up with this.
And
Yeah.
Sounds about
Seth,
right.
how many times would you say a week that you open up a rack for a specific animal? Because I kind of have the idea of how many times she's seeing her animals. So, yeah.
My babies are about 3 times a week, and my adults are about twice a week. That I'm laying eyes on each animal.
So it's
Um,
pretty similar between the two
pretty
types of
yeah, pretty
keeping.
close,
Well, I
pretty
do
close.
I do start almost every day with looking at my geckos just for fun. I know them all very personally. That's why I'm less worried about them getting sick, because I'm really personable with them. Uh, so I do see them every day, but just for maintenance 3 times a week. But that's only because I don't have a lot of geckos. That makes it just very easy. So yeah.
17 is a lot of geckos, in my opinion. So
Yeah,
that is pretty
yeah,
cool.
yeah. In that sense, yeah. But I don't have any major breeding projects going on.
But
Now,
I wonder if I could ask you to do a little experiment with your setups.
Yes,
If you would be willing to, I know it might stress them out a little bit, but if you would be willing to, I wonder if you'd be willing to cut off the undertank heater on a few of your adult males for a few weeks and
I can do
see how
that.
they react and record that, not necessarily record video record, but just record that data for us to be able to kind of and what's your room and also record what their actual room temp is in there. So like what are they going to drop down to?
Yeah,
Because I'd be curious to see if they're like more active, roaming looking for their spot, or if their appetite decreases, or like I'm just, or if they come out earlier to go absorb some heat because they start figuring out that they're not going to have it overnight. I'm curious if that would affect them or how it would affect them. I'm sure it would affect them, but I'm
I can
curious.
totally
Back
do
to the whole night drop thing.
that.
Just since you already had, I'm planning on doing my own experiment, but it's going to take some time to get it all set up and dialed in. But since you've already got them rocking and rolling, and you know how they act, and have such a good, you know, have such a good eye on them, I wonder if
there's an
you could
animal
mess with
getting
that.
out behind you, Mariah.
Oh yeah, somebody just.
One of them just dropped to the ground. Sorry.
Yeah.
Is he
Yeah,
okay?
poor little guy. This never happens. And then the one time I'm on a podcast where everyone can see it on a live, then it
He's
happens.
all right. He's
That's
all
okay.
right.
I
Yeah,
didn't
he's
notice it right
alright.
away.
He's actually he's a leopard gecko. He identifies as a leopard gecko. He's one of
Oh,
my social geckos, which is incredible.
he identifies as a leopard gecko.
I'm not surprised. He's sometimes he's begging for me to take him out. So yeah. That was Gamba. So
That's our fault. We were asking you too many questions and making you dig in your enclosures. Don't worry about it. It'll be all right.
I actually was watching that longer than I should have before I said something. I didn't want to be interruptive, and I thought, am I seeing what I think I'm seeing? And in the back of my head, I'll be honest, like they jump out and they fall and hit the ground all the time, and they're perfectly fine. So I know that kind of I thought it'll be all right. It didn't look too high up, but
It'll be all
I'm
right.
yeah,
yeah.
he's fine, but I'm embarrassed.
It's okay. uh, um, let's talk about shit. I don't know. We went over a lot. Is there anything you can think of that we didn't touch on, Mariah?
uh, Not really. No. If the people who are watching have any questions, shoot away.
What about let's see, Joe did an episode not too long ago talking about like mentorship and stuff like that. Who have you on that end of the world uh kind of learned from over the last 4 years, and like where have you sourced your animals from and all that?
Yeah, I have learned everything from a breeder from the Netherlands. He has quit the hobby, unfortunately, which makes me really sad. But his name is Tim de Lange. He has been keeping veto geckos for a long time in the Netherlands, and he has answered every question that I have. And yeah, I have a lot of veto geckos from him actually, and a few from Gecko Maniacs. So
Okay,
yeah, that was my biggest inspiration.
gotcha. Cool.
Yeah, so yeah.
Well, I don't know if I have anything else that let me see. Let me look over my care sheet real quick and make sure I'm not missing anything that I want to talk about on their general care, just for it to be here. How often do you feed your juveniles, your babies? But I do
My
about every other day, 3 times a week.
my hatchlings every day, and juveniles every other day.
Okay. And then
Yeah,
your adults, how often you feed them?
3 times a week.
3 times a week. Okay.
Yeah,
See, I'm more like I'm like every other day for the babies, and then about 3 times a week for the juveniles, and then twice a week for the adults is my feeding regimen. Um,
I had one for Mariah. Are where you live are racks something you're allowed to keep? Is
oh, that's a
there a
good
limit?
question. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
officially no.
Okay.
On the record, no, but everyone does it. So
Okay. What's
Yeah,
the
So
purpose behind that? Is the government involved, or maybe an animal? Uh,
there are some guidelines, but there is no control in any way, and there are no laws in any way. So it makes
okay.
it very hard to have anything hard to say like this you can do, because it's, yeah, there's no regulation really. Not even on the reptile species to keep, honestly, at this point. So yeah,
so
what?
there's not actually any laws, so there's no enforcement of it, but there are like recommendations that are made by
Yeah,
certain
yeah,
societies or whatever.
yeah. Yeah, there are only
Interesting.
regulations for the reptile expos themselves, but not for the way we keep them, except
Gotcha.
CITES and that sort of official legislations. That's different.
Gotcha.
Well, thank you for that.
Um, let's see. I'm just looking at my care sheet real quick, guys. Let's talk about how you record your temperature, because that's something that I think a lot of people are missing. I use an infrared temp gun. I have several of them. You get what you pay for with them. If you buy the
Yeah.
$10 ones, you get $10 worth of a temp gun. I recommend the around $30 ones. That's kind of the best bang for your buck.
Yep.
You don't need a $100 one, but don't buy the $10 ones. But that
Yeah.
is the most useful tool that you can have if you have a single reptile. And the great thing is, all you need is one, even if you have 1,000 reptiles.
Yeah.
So infrared temp gun. If you don't have one, get it now, like
Absolutely.
yesterday.
If I
Um,
may, I actually do air conditioning, heating, ventilation, and cooling.
yeah, you probably got some
And
insight on that.
we actually will small disagreement there. So they have a meter that's typically temp gun. Sorry, that's typically $200. It'll go on sale all the time for $100. And I do for accurate temperature readings. You have to remember it's measuring the temperature in between as well. And so the closer you can get, better. And obviously, you guys are right up on the temp, so it'll work well. But Fluke, Fluke, Fluke has the best temperature gun that I've ever worked with when it comes to that spatial distance.
And you
For
think that
everybody
it's
who
worth the
wants
money to
to,
get that $100 one, Joe? They're that much more
because of what
accurate.
you just said a second ago, where you only have to use it, buy it once, and then you can use it forever. I absolutely do. If I drop one off a roof or whatever, or out of an attic and break it, I get online and I grab another one right away for my
Oh,
job.
they got warranty.
And when it came to me wanting to get accurate temperatures, just because of how digestion works, I won't go too far into that. I grabbed a Fluke meter. It's a quick $100 bill. I can find it for a little less than that actually on Amazon for you if anybody's interested. I recommend them just because when I'm diagnosing in a completely other area, I prefer to have accurate readings. And there's a 5 to 7, sometimes 8 degree difference between cheap meters and a Fluke meter. So if you're
Wow,
talking
really
about
that much?
infrared, yeah, yep. So I just invite folks, if you want an accurate reading, you know, either you can get it's a psychrometer, or you can get the Fluke meter. The Fluke meters work really well. I use them for air conditioning. It helps me with my how I
And
keep everything.
Fluke is the brand, right?
Yeah, Fluke.
It's just
It's a nice.
a temp gun. It's just a regular temp gun like we're talking about, right? It's just a certain brand.
It is, yes. It works
Gotcha.
better than the Milwaukee, which is what I had before. Milwaukee is probably the better one before I got my Fluke meter, and that thing is it's as close to a psychrometer as I can get it. So
Cool. Um, yeah. So get a temp gun, everybody. $30 one, $100 one, whatever. Get a temp gun. Um, sorry guys, I'm just kind of going over this to make sure I'm not missing anything. I think we covered it all, guys. Is there anybody in the comments that is missing something? Thought they were gonna get when they came and didn't get it, or like, or did everybody get their fix? Everybody get their gecko fix?
anybody
Bubba,
ever
what you
talk
got?
to
Fluke that,
David?
yeah, fluke that. I like it. Humid hide. I can't stress how important a humid hide is. In my opinion, in every enclosure, even if you're doing a naturalistic enclosure, apparently, Mariah's got it dialed in to where she doesn't need one. But I recommend having one personally. I think that it doesn't hurt to have that one spot that's 100% humidity all the time. That way, if they need it, they have it.
So this right here. Same
Same
brand we
brand we
use.
use in the medical field. We get them 30-party calibrated, and they were always within. Yep, cool, good to know. Well, I'll change my recommendation there. Y'all definitely taught me something today. Of all the other things I learned today. Um, Man, I guess that's it, guys. I thought this was gonna take 2 hours, and we hit it on the nut, didn't we?
Yeah, you're just shy of it. It's awesome.
Um, Mariah, thank you for joining us. I
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Ben. It was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Good. I'm glad you had fun. I did too. I appreciate you being up for it because I know it was kind of last minute, and I was like, hey, let's do this. Joe, likewise. I know it was last minute. I appreciate you putting it together.
Absolutely.
And I think we need to start doing shit like this more often because I think that this is the kind of conversation that is going to change how the direction this hobby is headed in. And without these kind of conversations, it's not ever going to change. I'd just like to add whether you prefer a naturalistic bio or rec setup, ultimately those decisions or should be entirely based upon your specific gecko's requirements. Exactly. 100%,
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more, Heidi. Um, Make sure that you are focusing on the needs of that animal. Yep. If
Yep.
you
Yeah,
have
I'm glad I
neurological
got those out.
issues,
So
MBD, albinos sometimes can't thrive. Yep, 100%.
yeah,
Um,
there's a small lag between YouTube and here, so I'm glad I got those up while you were before you ended. Um, Personally, I wanted to thank both of you for offering to come on here. This was a really good idea. Seth and I have been talking about for a couple of days, and he's very open to it. And it was really nice to meet you, Mariah.
Thank you.
Hopefully, we can have you on as a guest sometime here in the near future.
I'd be
And
down for that.
wonderful, wonderful. Seth, I think you did a really great job, man. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. I had fun. It was as I expected, a very good conversation. I was able to learn a lot to be able to pass on to my customers, and it's going to be a great resource for me to be able to just tell people, hey, go check out this podcast.
Yep,
And they can spend 2 hours digesting this and then come back to me or hit you up, Mariah, with their questions.
Yep.
Um,
yep. Now, I
so
have both of your Instagrams plugged, obviously, in the description. Is there anything that either of you would like to have plugged before we end?
Facebook and Morph Market if you want. I'm not sure exactly. I'd have to get you the link here in a minute while we're waiting on the upload to happen. Oh, by the way, Mariah, don't log off whenever we first in the
Yeah.
live, okay?
Yeah. Got it.
Um, but no, again, I really appreciate you coming on, Mariah. I want to try to start doing things like this on a much more regular basis. I think that there's not enough of these conversations on record for people to be able to learn from
Yeah.
and refer to. And I think we need more of it. I think we need absolute more of it.
100%.
And
Yeah.
anybody that's out there that has something that they want to talk about or wants to learn more about, please reach out. Let's figure something out. Let's put something together. Definitely go check out my YouTube. There's hardly anything on there now, guys, but I promise you, I am going to dedicate myself to making at least one video a week to put up there that's going to be one specific thing about fat tails that is a care, you know, or husbandry video. Some of them might be 5 minutes, some of them might be 20 minutes, some of them might be 30 minutes. I don't know. But I promise that I'm going to dedicate myself to getting more content on there because there's not enough information about this species out there. And I'm realizing that and I want to change that. So go check out my YouTube. Be patient with it. It's going to eventually be there, but that's something that I definitely am going to be focused on moving forward. So hopefully that is something that people can use and will be a good resource for people. Um, Thanks everybody in the comments for having some
Yeah,
involvement and input because it's really nice to not just talk to Mariah and Joe, but to have other people kind of filling in those gaps because I had a direction I wanted to go and we covered a lot, but we definitely got some good questions out of the comments. So thanks everybody for tuning in.
Absolutely.
Um, and that's about it. Thanks everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I love this hobby. I love what I do. I love most of the people I meet. I got a funny saying when people ask me what my favorite part about the hobby is. I tell them the people I meet. They ask me what my least favorite part about the hobby is, it's the same damn answer. You know, Just like everything in life, there's both ends of the spectrum. So I'm glad to be able to locate and engage with some of the people that I do enjoy. So thanks everybody for tuning in and sticking around. I know it was a long 2 hours. Hopefully everybody got something out of it. And I guess we'll see everybody later. Huh? That's 2 hours on the mark.
See everybody.
Later, guys.